How's it going, you guys? Calico here, and my favorite time of the year, absolute favorite time of the year, every single year without fail, is October. The month just seems to be perfect. The leaves are beautiful colors, they're falling from the trees in these beautiful piles that you can jump in, you can rake them up. It's not like that nasty snow that leaves the ground all disgusting and wet and slippery and muddy. No, fall is perfect. The leaves are always crunchy, you can walk out in tennis shoes and just a hoodie, just like the one I'm wearing right now. You don't have to worry about big puffer jackets. You don't have to worry about rain, coats. You don't have to worry about big boots. Fall and October in general are perfect when it comes to the weather. They're perfect when it comes to the events. You have scary, spooky haunted houses. You have pumpkin patches. You have pumpkin carving. You have corn mazes, apple cider, apple bobs. I mean, come on. October never fails to hit every single year. But where it always slaps the fucking hardest, without fail, is in the horror movies. And that's why every single October, every year, for almost a decade now, I like to come around, I like to let all my degenerate urges out. I like to watch 31 horror movies for all 31 days of the month. This being the first time I've really had a YouTube channel to sit down and do this, I've decided I'm going to share it with you guys, make it an event. Calico's first annual horror movie marathon. 31 horror movies for 31 days. And today in this video, we're going to be sitting down, we're going to be talking about why I've picked these movies, giving you like a brief synopsis over the movies, telling you, maybe if it's the director I liked, if it's an actor, if it's the subgenre of movie that I've picked, specifically that is why it made it onto the list. Overall, I try to make sure that pretty much every single subgenre of horror is represented in these movies. I try to get a lot of movies from different directors, well-named directors, you know what I mean? The thing is, and the only problem is, I never put a movie I've already seen on the list. So it kind of is, by this point in time, made the list pretty scarce to choose from. Obviously, we still have a lot of bangers, a lot of stuff I still haven't seen before, a lot of great movies I haven't seen. The theme for this list overall will be David Cronenberg. Obviously, for anybody who knows who David Cronenberg is, we have The Fly right here. He did The Fly remake. Very good director, David Cronenberg is. We have 5 films of his on this list, 2 of his son's films on this list. Let's get into it, man. Let's get into it. Coming in at number 1 on this list, the very first movie that we're going to start the marathon off with will be 1960's Peeping Tom. Kind of a weird one. This is going to be a really old one, obviously, from 1960. Usually these older movies have to rely on ambiance a lot. They have to rely on, good performances sometimes. They have to rely on the general overall mood that the movie can bring to the table, as opposed to just over-the-top kills and gore that some movies nowadays can fall back on. And I think if this movie wasn't such like a psychological thriller, from what I can read, obviously, like I said, I've never seen these movies before, but if this movie wasn't such a psychological thriller, kind of like Psycho, which came out just a few years after it, I think it may be considered one of the first slasher movies ever, because, it's about a guy stalking women, following them into bathrooms late at night. I don't know 100% if he kills them, though. That's TBD. We're going to find out once we watch it, but hey, if an older movie about a guy following women into bathrooms and stalking them sounds like something that you'd be interested in, please sit down and watch Peeping Tom with us to start this list off. Coming in at number 2 on the list, we will be shouting out all of our fellow Riggas that are subscribed to the channel, because Scanners is a 1981 Canadian science fiction horror movie. And this is also David Cronenberg's first appearance on the list. Only the second movie in, and he's already making his influence. Good to see. This is one I'm actually fairly excited for David Cronenberg. David Cronenberg as a whole, as a director, I'm not super familiar with. I've seen a couple of his movies here and there. Scanners is one I have not obviously seen, that's why it's on the list. But aside from just reading a straight up plot synopsis, I can't find a whole lot to share with you guys about this movie, or to not spoil the movie a bunch for myself. So just from what I can tell, it's just a movie about people using their telepathic powers to potentially do some no good things. If that sounds like potentially interesting to you, if science fiction horror really is interesting to you, like body horror, any David Cronenberg movie will probably be right up your alley. Coming in at number 3 is a movie that honestly I'm really excited about. If I made a top 10 list for all the movies I was most excited for on here, this would probably be top 10 for sure. We have a Spanish H.P. Lovecraft fantasy horror flick from Stuart Gordon, who obviously has done H.P. Lovecraft horror before with Reanimator very successfully. Dagon is an early 2000s horror movie that, aside from it being H.P. Lovecraft, aside from being familiar with the character of Dagon and Stuart Gordon's work, don't know anything about this movie. I've completely stayed away from reading anything about this movie. I want to go in fairly blind for this one. The only thing I can recommend you guys, if you want to join in on watching this one with me, would be if you like H.P. Lovecraft, if you like fantasy horror, if you like Reanimator, I'd maybe do a quick Google search of like Dagon, see if that's something you're interested in. But if you're interested in H.P. Lovecraft at all, definitely check this one out with me, you guys. Coming in next on the list is another movie that I'm really, really excited about. A Japanese horror movie from the early 2000s, whenever Japanese horror kind of like stormed into Western cinemas. Dark Water is a movie that honestly, the story of the movie isn't super exciting. It's about a mother and her daughter that move into a hotel. The hotel has some interesting mishaps going on. It's a pretty by the numbers story for a horror. But what's really interesting is the case has some eerie parallels to the the death of Elisa Lam case, the real life case that happened 11 years after the movie came out. Very, very weird. So I'm interested to finally sit down and watch this movie because I'm pretty familiar with that case. So I'm interested to see what the parallels really are. Coming in at number 5, I was really, really close to saying this is our first new horror movie on the list. And then I realized that 2016 was 7 years ago. 7 years ago. Conor McGregor last won a fight at lightweight 7 years ago, 2016. Think about that, you guys. Holy shit. Time just flies by. Anyway, Don't Breathe is the next horror movie that we're going to be watching. This is kind of like a claustrophobic, cat and mouse kind of horror movie from what I can tell. It's about a group of people that are going in to rob an older man. The older man is a little more well-equipped than they would have liked to have thought. And the rest of the movie is about them trying to actually escape an older blind man as he hunts them throughout his house, which seems to be pretty, trapped up, gassed up. He seems like a pretty based old man with the booby traps. Next up is one that I don't think I'll have to be talking about for too very long, but it is one that I'm sure that probably any slasher fan, B-rate horror movie fan, cult horror movie fan has heard of. The Slumber Party Massacre from 1980-something. I don't know, the 1980s. It's a B-rate, cult, everything I just named horror movie from the 1980s that follows a group of ladies being terrorized by a fella with an assortment of power tools at his disposal. I've had this one on my list for quite some time. This is the perfect time to sit down and watch it. Moving on to the next one, honestly. Wrapping up the first week of the horror movie marathon, coming in at number 7 will be Mike Flanagan's Oculus. This is actually the last movie I need to watch from Mike Flanagan. After watching this, I will have seen his entire filmography, even his short horror movies from back in the day. So that's pretty cool. This is going to be a psychological horror movie about a mirror and a lady trying to prove that her brother's murder trial has influence from a demonic possession. Mike Flanagan obviously is a guy who's kind of nailed the psychological horror genre. Gerald's Game, Before I Wake, this one. Probably should have wrote some stuff down right here in front of me, but those are just coming off the top of my head. The guy's really nailed the genre. It's kind of like his expertise. That's his forte. That's what he likes to do. Can't wait to see this one, and then we'll have checked all his movies off the list. From the outside looking in, if you were going to sit down and say what the best movie on this list probably is, you'd have to say it's Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. You don't often see one of the greatest filmmakers, one of the greatest directors ever throw their hat into a horror genre. It's kind of an area that, people stay away from. It's kind of a taboo area. But whenever Francis Ford Coppola decided to do it, he took on not only one of the greatest pieces of literature ever written in the genre, with Dracula, obviously, but he also decided to bring in an all-star cast of Gary Oldman as the Count, Winona Ryder as the Count's love interest, obviously. You have Keanu Reeves in there. You have Sir Anthony Hopkins as the Dracula-slaying, the vampire-slaying badass that is Van Helsing. This movie honestly looks amazing. I can't believe I've never seen it before. If I had to recommend a few movies for you guys to 100% watch, sit down and watch on this list no matter what, this would have to be one I'd have to say that you guys cannot miss out on. So next up probably actually is our first real new horror movie on the list, 2020's Possessor from Brandon Cronenberg, David Cronenberg's son. Like I said, there were 2 of his son's movies on this list, this being one of the 2 of them. This one follows a lady who gets into people's brains, and then one of the people's bodies that she takes over starts to corrupt her as well. Seems like it's a pretty Cronenberg body horror kind of movie. Has a lot of their signature styles that you're going to see throughout Cronenberg's entire filmography. I'm pretty excited for this one. Coming in at number 10 is one that if I had to tell you guys one of these movies to watch, this is probably it. Phil Tippett's Mad God. It honestly looks like a fucking crazy fever dream of a movie. It looks like a bad psychedelic trip. It looks like a nightmarish hellscape. You guys need to watch the trailer for it right now. This movie, and this may be a fairly long explanation of why I think you guys should watch this one, but this movie has been in production for like 30 years, since RoboCop 2. RoboCop 2 is when this movie started being made. Obviously, it hasn't been being made for 30 years. There have been long breaks in between. But Phil Tippett's a guy who has worked on countless great special effects movies. This guy has insane special effects talent, insane stop motion talent. He's worked on Jurassic Park. He's worked on, like I said, RoboCop. RoboCop, obviously the stop motion animation in that one, ridiculously next level for the time, obviously in the 1980s. Man, Mad God is one you guys have to watch. It basically follows a guy who lands on this strange alien planet, and you see a guy, I believe it's a real actor in the suit. I don't know if it's a real actor in the actual suit or if he's also stop motion, but the entire world around him is stop motion. The movie looks absolutely nuts, you guys. Please go and watch the trailer. Very excited for this one. This is by far going to be the shortest explanation on this list. Next up, we have Robert Rodriguez's Planet Terror. This is kind of a weird, is this even horror entry on this list? It's kind of like an action, sci-fi, horror elements movie. I like Robert Rodriguez. I like his work. I like From Dusk Till Dawn. Obviously, he's done sort of stuff with Quentin Tarantino. Sort of excited for this one. Moving on. So ghost, supernatural, poltergeist movies usually really aren't my cup of tea, but whenever you sit down and make one of these lists during the spooky season, you have to have one of them represented on the list, and this year we went with Innkeepers. For a number of reasons, I'm actually pretty interested in this one. It's an early movie in Ty West's career, who is now a very, very promising filmmaker, coming out with movies like Pearl, X, and now working on Maxine, which I think is coming out next year or later this year, maybe in October of this year. I need to honestly check up on that. But Ty West, this seems like one of those situations where a good filmmaker who has a lot of good ideas kind of has to resort to making a cheap to make movie early in his career, like a ghost movie or a found footage movie. This one seems to follow the employees of a hotel who are going to set up cameras and document supernatural findings that they believe are going on after hours. So whenever I made this horror movie list, I randomized all of them, except for the last three. I wanted to make sure that the last three all took place on Halloween, because they're going to be leading up to Halloween. I kind of wanted to make sure that everybody's getting in the proper mood, But outside of that, everything was randomized. And it's kind of unfortunate, because it's put two of Brandon Cronenberg's movies really close to each other on the list. Obviously, we just had Possessor, and now we have this year's Infinity Pool. Whenever horror movies are forced to release in that early time slot, January, February, March, it's kind of a bad sign. It's kind of a sign that they're going to not be very good. This one seemed to have gotten really good reviews, rave reviews actually. So I'm pretty excited for it. It has Mia Goth and Alexander Skarsgård, two actors that I'm pretty fond of. And it is about a man and his wife visiting a small foreign town and kind of uncovering some interesting mysteries about the town. I know I said the theme for this movie marathon was going to be David Cronenberg and his filmography, but it's really starting to become movies that I've been meaning to watch for a long time, it feels like, because coming up next we have Wreck. This is a found footage style movie, obviously found footage, Blair Witch Project, Cloverfield, movies like that. Not really my style of movies. I don't really like them a whole lot. It kind of makes me a little uneasy. I don't really care for the style of filmmaking. But this one, I've been wanting to watch it for a long time. A friend of mine keeps telling me to watch it. Here we are. Basically, it's about a bunch of people who are locked in an apartment building with a deadly virus. And not the kind of virus that'll get you demonetized off YouTube either. Halfway through the list now, coming in number 15, we have our second David Cronenberg movie, and honestly the one that I'm probably the most excited about. Adapting a Stephen King novel, The Dead Zone, isn't one that, from what I can tell, has a lot of that David Cronenberg signature body horror, but instead it's a psychological horror movie about a guy who nearly escapes a near-death experience and develops psychological powers because of it. Coming up next at number 16, we have another fairly new horror movie, A24's French psychological horror movie, Climax. I've been wanting to watch this one ever since it came out back in 2018 at Cannes. And just for a number of reasons, honestly, A24's movies consistently disappoint me, and that's kind of why it sat on this shelf for so long. But this one appears to be a very stylistic movie, a very aesthetic movie, about a bad Molly trip. A group of kids, group of friends going on a bad Molly trip during a big, rave party. Looks very, like I said, stylistic, looks very entertaining. If you don't mind visuals, if you don't have epilepsy, this one might be for you. Honestly, this is going to be another really short explanation as well. The Lodge is a movie that I've only included on this list because I wanted to get like a really claustrophobic, almost like snowed in kind of horror movie on the list. And this is going to fit the bill. A movie following a new stepmother, like her and her stepkids are fairly new, from what I can tell reading the synopsis of the movie. Her and her two stepdaughters are locked into a lodge together, and there seems to be an interesting entity in the lodge with them. So my favorite horror movie of all time is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974 for a large variety of reasons. The aesthetic of the movie, the redneck, borderline dark comedy of the movie being two of the largest reasons why. Eaten Alive is another Tobe Hooper redneck horror comedy that I can tell. And they're not really comedies, you know what I mean? Don't let comedy make you think that this is like a trying to be funny thing. It's comedy in the way that it's like, man, this is twisted, but it's actually kind of real, so it's kind of funny. Eaten Alive is a movie following a man who kills people in the swamps of Louisiana and then feeds them to a giant alligator in his backyard. This one has Tobe Hooper in it, obviously Freddy Krueger, well before he donned the glove and the burned face. I'm very, very excited for this one. I would say that if you guys were picking 5 or so movies to watch, put this in the list. Next up is another David Cronenberg movie. This is also a movie that I've fallen asleep to before. The Brood is actually one that I think could be a potential hidden gem. It's basically about a bunch of mutant kids terrorizing this man who's trying to perform unethical experimental practices, medical procedures and experiments on his wife. Like I said, this could seriously be a gem. I don't even remember why I fell asleep to it, but regardless, we're going to try it again. Skinamarink is a movie I am very excited for. This is one that I specifically did not look up a lot of stuff for. I want to go into this one fairly blind. This is a newer horror movie, and the general concept about this one seems to be a group of siblings wake up and everything's gone. Their parents are gone. All of the doors and the windows to their house are gone, and I don't know anything else outside of that one. This one seems extremely fascinating to me. These really claustrophobic, set in one scene kind of horror movies can really do it for me sometimes, so I'm really, really excited for this one. Earlier, the randomizer kind of did us dirty giving us the back-to-back Brandon Cronenberg movies. That was kind of a bummer, but it has seriously blessed us this time around, giving us Skinamarink and now Perfect Blue back-to-back. These are two movies that seriously have high potential, banger capabilities. These may be amazing movies. Perfect Blue is a movie I've been waiting to watch forever. I don't know what it is about this movie with the streaming services. I had a really hard time finding this movie for a long time. I now own this movie physically, so we're in the driver's seat, baby. If you're not into animation, if you're not into Japanese animation specifically, this is probably one that you should sit out. Perfect Blue follows a Japanese pop star who is being stalked by an intense incel fan, and, shit like that can get pretty scary. Very real horror. I'm really, really excited for this one, you guys. I think that the ending, I've already got the ending sort of spoiled for me, I'm not going to lie. Like I said, this is honestly a really old movie. It's like from the 1990s. I'm not going to say anything about the movie here or anything, but I'm really excited to finally just get to sit down and enjoy this one. Coming in at 22, we have the second Stuart Gordon movie on this list. This one, as far as I can tell, doesn't have any influence from H.P. Lovecraft at all. Castle Freak. I don't have a whole lot to say about this one. It seems like it's about a couple who moves into a big Italian castle. They inherit a big Italian castle, and there seems to be a monstrous girl living in the basement, causing havoc and problems for the family. Coming in at the Michael Jordan entry on this list, number 23, we have Urban Legend. In the 1980s, the market was extremely oversaturated with a lot of the same by-the-numbers slasher movies that featured a killer and a final girl. So by the time the 1990s rolled around, we had to get a little bit more interesting, a little bit more creative with the formula, with movies like Scream, Child's Play, and Nightbreed. Urban Legend is the exact same thing. You get a slasher movie with a twist. And what the twist this time is that the killer, all the kills that the killer is committing are all based on typical urban legends that you would find anywhere in pop culture. Pretty excited for this one. I've known about it for a long time, and here we are to check it off the list. Next up is a movie that I've known about for a very long time, but a movie that I don't really know a lot about, to be honest. Maniac just seems to be like a movie about a guy going around and killing a bunch of women. It doesn't seem like there's a lot else to the movie. It's a slasher from the 80s, probably very similar to one of those by-the-number ones that I was talking about earlier in the last entry. Next up is one that I got recommended by a friend. The Stepfather is a movie that seems to have sort of anthology-like characteristics. It's a movie about a stepfather who has a bunch of different families that they don't know about, and he's committing murders amongst each one of the families. But one of the older kids from one of the families starts to kind of pick up onto some of the weird characteristics and traits that he has. I don't know a lot about this one. I'm pretty excited to go in blind for it. I don't think it is an anthology movie. But it just has like those elements of where one family's story may not have that much to do with the next family's story, but regardless, you're going to get a few cohesive stories all in one. In the intro, I believe I said we had 5 David Cronenberg movies. It actually seems like we only have 4. This is the 4th and final one on the list. Shivers is a movie about a bunch of alien parasites that get in and infest a high-rise, high-end, expensive apartment complex. A bunch of snooty rich people inside of there, and turn them all into just sex-depraved, sinning coomers, honestly. This one looks like a lot of fun, more body horror from Cronenberg here. I'm really excited for this one. So there's a lot of subgenres of horror, obviously. A shit ton. I'm not going to sit here and name all of them for you guys. But my personal favorite one, the one that hits home the hardest, and I don't really know if it's like a subgenre as much as it is just like a style of filmmaking, to be honest, but anthology horror movies really are my thing. I love the ability to have a bunch of horror movies, basically mini horror movies packed into one giant movie. You'll get 3, 4, 5 stories even sometimes in one movie. So if you're not really enjoying what you're watching at one point in time, just sit tight because the next story may be more up your alley. The House That Dripped Blood is the anthology movie we're going with for this marathon in specific. I'm really excited for this one. It has Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, so you're getting Van Helsing and Dracula from 2 different eras of Dracula, obviously. 4 different stories in this one. I haven't done a whole lot of research onto each individual story. I like to go into these kind of movies blind. I don't really want to research too much because sometimes the stories can only be 10, 15 minutes long. So if you do too much research, you may actually end up spoiling a little too much for yourself. I'd recommend to watch this one, you guys. Did you really think we were going to have this entire horror movie marathon without an alien movie? Next up, we have Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We're going to be going with the 1978 remake of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers from the 50s. Both very good movies. You could go with either one. Classic remake we're going to be going with here. Obviously, like I said, I haven't seen it. I'm just going based off of general consensus. This movie is very popular. A lot of people have seen it. Very highly reviewed, very critically acclaimed. I'm very excited for this one, you guys. It basically follows a small, quiet town. Some new residents have moved in, and they are noticing that their family and friends are starting to act a little odd and peculiar around them. So we are into the last 3 movies of the list, and like I said earlier, I've tried to handpick these last 3 movies to make sure that they are really trying to get us into this Halloween spirit. So in some way or another, they either take place on the day of Halloween, or the major events of the movie revolve around the holiday of Halloween in some way. The one that will be kicking off this list will be May. I have no clue anything about this movie. Honestly, we're kind of getting like really bare bones with the movies that take place on Halloween for me because I've seen so many of them. It really only seems like this movie takes place on the day of Halloween that connects it to the holiday in any way. Just a horror movie about a very disturbed woman and some people around her trying to see what the hell really is wrong with her. With some foresight, the newer horror movies on this list may not be all that great, but there's some ones that I'm really, really excited for, and Haunt is one I'm very, very excited for. This is a newer horror movie that takes place inside of an extreme haunted house, a group of kids going to one of those extreme haunted houses, kind of like a McCamey Manor or like St. Albans Sanatorium, the one that's in North Carolina, I believe. These extreme haunted houses where you go there, they'll kind of beat you up, they'll touch you, they'll grab you, they'll do things that aren't necessarily really ethical and that you wouldn't really see in a traditional haunted house that you wouldn't sign a waiver for. But as they spend more time inside of this house, they sort of start to notice that this may not be a normal haunted attraction. And ladies and gentlemen, we are here to the last movie on the list. Number 31. If you guys have made it to the end of the video, I genuinely do appreciate it. We will be talking about Trick or Treat. Not to be confused with Trick or Treat, a much better movie, probably. I don't know, I haven't seen this movie. But Trick or Treat is a rock and roll horror movie. It is about a young boy who idolizes a heavy metal rock band's lead singer who tragically passes away in a hotel fire. And one way or another, the boy becomes in possession of this singer's last record known to man, the one that nobody else has ever heard of. And he discovers that when you play this record back, there may be some demonic messaging hidden on the record. For everyone who watched this video all the way through, I genuinely appreciate it, you guys. Thank you so much. And for anybody who sits and actually watches all these movies with me, if anybody does, I really, really appreciate it. I'm excited for this October. Like I said, this is my favorite time, you guys. I'm really, really excited for this list. I'm excited for these movies, some more than others. Obviously, I think you could probably tell based on how I talked about it, my tone when I was talking about them, or just how long I talked about that movie, for how excited I really am for it. But regardless, I picked every one of these for a reason, and I think that they all have potential to at least be very entertaining. Thank you guys so much. I would appreciate it if you could drop a like on the video if you did enjoy it. And hey, tune into one of my live streams. We go live pretty often, pretty much every single night. It's just been here recently we haven't because I've been working tirelessly on this video right here. Thank you guys so much. Take it easy, and we will be back.